Now we're back. I should help if I unmute myself, but we are back on Rogue Gang Radio, broadcasting live on iHeartRadio, YouTube, and RogueGangRadio.com. The mics are hot, and good old NOLA, baby.
And you're going to be hot for this book. Sorry, I had to do that transition. Sam Kelly is an historian and viral TikToker. He is also the author of The Human History on Drugs, an utterly scandalous but entirely truthful look at the history under the influence. I don't even know where to begin with this book because I enjoyed it so very much. I recommend, we do this a lot. We read a lot of books on this show. We go through about 2 to 3 a week. Sometimes children's books like with our last guest, and sometimes book like this, which is so much fun and actually one of my favorite kind of books because it's the kind of book that after you read it, you can then pick it back up and revisit it. Good morning to you, by the way. It's great to have you, and thank you for making the time, Sam.
Absolutely. It is great to be here.
So I just had a guy on the show, Scott Shea, who actually wrote a really great piece about the 5 winners and the 5 losers at the Monterey Pop Festival. He actually wrote a really good book on the Mamas and the Papas. I am utterly obsessed with origin stories and how things get going and how things get started. He's written one of the best kind of analyses of why it is the Monterey Pop Festival worked, and then kind of did a deep dive analysis of all of that kind of stuff. Been kind of following the stories of Brian Wilson's passing away, in recent times, the idea of what's happened with that and how much of that was drug-fueled and all this kind of stuff. I don't know where to begin here, other than saying that some of our most provocative thinkers, some of the most challenging thought that has actually emanated in simply the last 200 years, but you go back further than that, really springs from the fact of, I sat down one night and thundered my way through and took so many drugs over the course of the day, writing this amazing treatise on existentialism that I've got to take barbiturates to get to bed. But now that I've woken up with barbiturates in my system, I've got to somehow then turn around and take a whole bunch of speed to keep on writing. And I was kind of curious, did you know the depth of what you were walking into when you walked into this drug-fueled culture?
So I always had the sense that there was a lot more of this really interesting, very human experience that doesn't necessarily get told in the mainstream portrayals of these things. I find that even with people who were totally into drugs, a lot of times the mainstream story of it just sort of glides over that, kind of pushes it out as though it's not interesting. And that always seemed insane to me because I thought, no, this is so fascinating. Why are you not telling this story? So I was definitely expecting to find a lot of people using substances, but the actual details that I uncovered about these people and some of the lengths that they would go to really did kind of stun me. I didn't expect it to have gone that far. I mean, the lifestyle you're talking about is pretty much how Jean-Paul Sartre actually lived. He would just do massive amounts of drugs on a daily. He was like the Hunter S. Thompson of the existentialists. And it didn't occur to me when I first started doing the research just how much a lot of these people would really get into drugs.
Oh, yeah. And by the way, in case you guys feel like you've been dropped into an in media res moment here, you have been. Sam Kelly, by the way, is a history graduate of Stanford University. He's on the spectrum, and his interest and passion for history have become almost a physical compulsion. He does love to dig up the forgotten and weird stories from the past and spends hours uncovering every last stubborn detail, by the way. And we are thrilled to have him on the show. Sorry about that, Sam. I just wanted to kind of just jump in on the far side of the world and kind of get digging into this stuff. And when I got to the chapter on Sartre, I'm not sure if people are aware that Graham Greene actually was able to write The Power and the Glory and Our Man in Havana. His project was, I wanted to write a great piece of literature and something that would make me money, and he did it by taking just buckets of speed for about 6 or 7 weeks. It was just crazy how much artistry. And we'll get to the political side of things in a second here with JFK and Richard Nixon and a whole bunch of other characters and George Washington as well. But how much artistry and how many lives were cut short simultaneously by using these drugs. And I'm curious your take about whether or not, because there are a lot of people now say, look, I create great art and I got sober. God bless them. I got sober 30 years ago. But is there any truth to the idea that sometimes these drugs do give us the doors of perception? See what I did there?
I mean, yeah, like certainly Aldous Huxley believed so. It's fascinating to see the transformation that takes place in his work when he writes Brave New World before he gets into psychedelics, and there drug use is portrayed in a very negative sort of like it's portrayed as something that dulls people's minds and makes them willing to accept a very flawed society. But then he actually starts doing mescaline and stuff like that, and he gets way more into it. So by the time of his last book, he's talking about a society in which people are given drugs as a regular thing, and he portrays it as a very positive thing. So from his perspective, again, and he wrote that whole opening the doors of perception thing, just talking about his experiences with psychedelics, and he felt that it was very positive for his creativity. And of course, there are lots of people who they are both very productive under the influence of drugs, but it's not necessarily good for them. And you can see the themes coming from drug addiction in their writing. Great examples in my book is Philip K. Dick.
Oh, wow.
The guy whose writing was adapted into Total Recall, into Blade Runner, into Minority Report. That guy had like the kind of bowl that you would imagine people putting popcorn in for a movie. He just had one of those full of amphetamines instead and would just down fistfuls of amphetamines, terrifying amounts of it. And so it was able to get him extraordinary amounts of writing done. But at the same time, a lot of the writing that you read of his, you can tell that he was a paranoid wreck. I mean, think about like Total Recall. It's like, what if my entire life, what if all the memories that I have of myself, my marriage, my job, my sense of my personality, what if these things are all fake and I don't know they're fake? Or Blade Runner, like, what if I'm a robot and I don't know that I'm a robot because I've been conditioned to believe that I'm real? Like the feeling of amphetamine psychosis is not far from the kind of themes that are there in a lot of Philip K. Dick works.
Well, yeah, and by the way, because I want to dive into some a deeper conversations like we're having here, I want to make sure people understand the book, by the way, covers 40 historical figures in 40 chapters and starts with ancient Greece and makes its way through Imperial China all the way to the modern day. So I wanted to make sure you guys were aware of that. And you can find him, by the way, you can find Sam on TikTok. It is, by the way, there are a lot of people over there following it, including myself. He's got more than 100,000 followers and about 2.4 million likes. Let me do this quickly because I want to get to a couple of specifics here. I'm going to name a person. You tell me what their drug issue was, and we'll do this in rapid-fire fashion, and then we'll kind of get back to more in-depth discussions here. So Queen Victoria.
Okay, Queen Victoria, in terms of what she did, she was very fond of cocaine-infused products like cocaine wine, cocaine chewing gum, also very fond of selling drugs, as in she was the one who was leading the strategy to sell opium to China. At its peak, that was 10 to 15% of the British Empire's income. So drug dealer, opium, drug user, cocaine, and also chloroform and some other stuff. The chloroform she was giving birth for, though.
So, George Washington.
George Washington, opium, because you always hear that George Washington had wooden teeth. No, he didn't. That's a euphemism. He wishes he had wooden teeth. These things are this Frankenstein nightmare made of corpses' teeth pulled from slaves and from the teeth of livestock, all wired together on a metal frame and forced into his mouth and hooked there via the one real tooth that he actually had there. Extremely painful. You notice that in any picture of George Washington, he's never smiling and his mouth is always shut. And so he had to have opium in order to have these teeth in his mouth, and he needed to have the teeth in the mouth because you can't talk properly without teeth, and therefore you can't lead a fledgling nation or a revolution.
Well, and what's also interesting, too, is that, you know, we've had, as a regular contributor on the show, Peter Stark, who wrote a beautiful book called Young Washington, about how as a young man he was very impetuous, very impatient, too outspoken. As he gets older, he becomes a man of fewer and fewer words and is very deliberative in what he says. You could almost make the case that those teeth and that the drugs he took to alleviate the pain from it made him very measured in how he approached things. You could make a case that part of his image was actually manufactured by both the pain and the opium.
I mean, definitely. It would necessarily mean that he wouldn't want to waste his words unless he had something valuable to say. And it also would mean that, yeah, his demeanor was probably going to be more subdued than it otherwise would be because he had to be tranquilized in order to not rip his own teeth out.
We have some very, very big, we are also a pro-veteran space here. We have very, very big fans of Audie Murphy, but there's a lot of stuff about Audie Murphy, and some of which he actually wrestled with successfully in his life. Tell us a little bit about Audie Murphy.
Absolutely. So yeah, Audie Murphy. Well, again, I call him the real life Captain America for his accomplishments. He was a war hero extraordinaire in World War II. Won countless medals for his bravery and his willingness to go into danger to defend his other troops. This is a guy who had, when he came back to the States after his war experience, they made a movie based on his life called To Hell and Back. And his achievements, his real achievements that he won medals for over in Europe, were so amazing, they had to actually tone the movie down because they were afraid that people wouldn't believe the true story. And so this guy is, he was just a guy with a true warrior spirit, and he wasn't like some big, bulky guy either. He was a pretty average height, even maybe a little short, and he was just brave and courageous. And so he becomes a movie star, and he's widely beloved. But what a lot of people don't realize is that he does not come back from the war unscathed. The things he did left lifelong impacts on him, and so he had pretty bad PTSD for a long time. He could not get to sleep without taking sleeping pills. He became hooked on sleeping pills. He slept with a gun under his pillow for years because he just had that fear from being in the war like that. And he did a very brave and noble thing by, in a time when people would often be condemned for speaking up about this, he was brave enough to say, you know what, after I came back from the war, I developed a drug problem. I had a problem with the sleeping pills, and I had a problem with PTSD. Like, it might seem like things were okay after the war, but this really messed me up. And so he, in becoming an advocate for veterans who'd undergone trauma and for veterans who had medical problems, and for talking about PTSD in general at a time when that was stigmatized, he was a great inspirational figure, and sadly he passed away in a plane crash. But yes, he was someone who, he talked about these things when they were still very stigmatized.
Well, and also he calls attention. This is an amazing thing as well, too, is that, so much of what your book also reveals through mosaic, meaning that it's a slow building kind of process, it begins to dawn on us. Some of these people are, drug addicts, but some of them, a lot of them, most of them merely speak to the inability of medicine to advance along with human progress. As a lot of these people are taking this for pain, a lot of these people are obvious sufferers of neurodivergent conditions and trying to keep themselves on track. There's an ongoing theme that pharmacology, despite the criticisms people level at it these days, is certainly a lot better than people drinking themselves to death at 50, people literally having heart attacks from taking too many beanies. I mean, this is really the ongoing story here, is the fact that a lot of these people are actually self-medicating in very what is it? Right diagnosis, wrong prescription a lot of the time. That's a fair
Absolutely.
assessment, correct?
That is a fair assessment. Yeah, no, it is. It's striking to see just how many people in this book were failed by the medicine of their day. And like, if they'd had similar resources that they did back then, but with modern technology, a lot of people could have had significantly better outcomes. Other people just did not realize. Like, the whole thing with Elvis Presley is that Elvis starts taking amphetamines when he's in the military. Before that, he had been super clean cut, didn't do any kind of substances. And after he comes back, he's still very anti-street drugs. Like, he would chastise anyone if he heard like a backup dancer had been smoking marijuana or something, he'd scold them and say, "Don't do it again." But of course, at the same time, he's being given massive amounts of opioid painkillers and barbiturates and other pills that he is hooked on. But because he was someone who grew up in an environment where he didn't have a lot of medical knowledge, his understanding was, no, I can't be hooked on this. A doctor gave it to me. A doctor surely wouldn't give me something that could hurt me. Medicine only helps.
The U.S.
right?
military wouldn't pump me full of speed unless it was good for me. I mean, that's...
Yeah, it's like, I'm sure they had good reasons for it. And of course, what he doesn't realize is that a lot of the time, what he thought... there was more effort put by his promoters and his manager on making him just able to keep performing regardless of what it did to his body, and not on making him actually mentally healthy. So they would just give him whatever they needed to get him through more shows, and you balance the painkillers after all the different all the gyrations and the shows he's done, and then you take the unhealthy diet that he's eating, and it's not a surprise that he ends up with a complete intestinal blockage that kills him when he's 42 on the toilet.
Yeah, and it's he and Judy Garland. You could actually make the case that he and Judy Garland are the two great Frankenstein monsters of entertainment, where they become almost experimental landscapes for predatory managers and producers to figure out how much a performer can take before you blow them out, before you finally wreck them. Because the Judy Garland stories, by the way, she is merely the biggest logical extension where you have a genuine collaboration between the studios and the family to create a... Judy Garland ceases to be a person and becomes a money ticket for everybody involved, and they have a certain obligation to their investors to maintain that reality, correct?
Exactly. Yeah, Judy Garland was so much of a victim of not being supported and being forced into dangerous stuff by this industry. So yeah, they would routinely give her she have to work up to like 72 hours. They'd pump her full of amphetamines. They'd give her barbiturates to sleep, and then when she got back up, it'd be amphetamines to get her on the go again. She was, and they would just psychologically torment her too. Like they would say that she was fat,
oh my
and
God.
And so they would make her like. At one point, no matter what she would ask for meals, all they would give her is soup, coffee, and cigarettes. Like they would just insist on giving her this terrible diet that would just make the effect of the medication worse. And so it was, you end up with this incredibly talented, incredibly charming, likable person who ends up just hating herself and being miserable because she's being told that, oh, you're ugly, you need to be better, you need to be more perky, you need to be more a lot. And so she is just, nothing that she does is good enough for them. Even after she becomes a huge hit with The Wizard of Oz, they just keep exploiting her. And yeah, they use her like she's a product to be exploited and not a human being with feelings and who's capable of pain.
Yeah, and then the worst part about Garland is when she finally gets around some people that love her, the reality of what she's become makes it impossible for them to deal with her as a human being because whatever has been there has been broken, by the way. It really is incredible, too. Okay, a couple more quick ones. Alexander the Great.
Alexander the Great, big-time party animal, loved drinking very heavily and opium, and this combines to basically destroy his immune system, which is not a good thing if you're constantly invading other places. You're going to get a lot of tropical diseases that way. So he dies at age 32, having never lost a battle against his enemies, but having essentially drank himself like half to death, and then disease finishing him off.
By the way, what really is fun and cool is the fact that, William Shakespeare has a couple of issues himself, and he also, if you read his text really carefully, there's a couple of people in his plays who, including Mark Antony, who like to really tippler it. But what about Wild Bill Shakespeare?
Well, yeah. So Shakespeare was a stoner. They did find in the backyard of his home in Stratford-upon-Avon, they found ceramic pipe pieces dating to when he lived there, his time, that have tobacco and cannabis encrusted on them. And you consider that he made up hundreds of words and then just used them like it was no big deal. And those are now, in many cases, part of the English language, or the fact that, again, in some of his works, it's made very clear that people are engaging in the use of unusual substances. Like in A Midsummer Night's Dream, there's a love potion that is given to them that comes from the juice of a poppy flower. So it's pretty much just opium.
Oh, yeah.
And he blinks and nods at that.
Yeah, the obsession, by the way, of potions and elixirs and mixes, both in his plays and the plays of Ben Jonson, is just crazy. I mean, people are literally gassing themselves up. Let me ask you something. In kind of going through all this and assembling this this gallery of historical figures, I talked about the idea of modern medicine not yet being, up to speed to take care of a lot of these people. Were there any kind of consistencies that you noticed, despite the disparate nature of the people that you're looking at here?
Well, yeah, I mean, definitely there would be the case of, like in the 19th century, for instance, you see so many people using opium in the form of laudanum, like, it's opium suspended in alcohol that you can drink. And that was just like treated as a ubiquitous cure-all for a long time. It was sold in the U.S. and the U.K. and all sorts of places. You could buy it at a pharmacy with no prescription. The labels on it would say like, "Oh, hey, does your baby have a sore throat? Give a few drops to your baby. It's fine." Like, and so it was. There was such a long period in which the main form of workable medicine was just you go to a place and you buy an over-the-counter concoction of opium and alcohol, and that was probably the most effective form of medicine they had at the time. And so it was striking to see just how many people would like you get reminded about the supply chains of these things. Like, oh, hey, like the same cocaine wine that Queen Victoria drinks is also popular with Ulysses S. Grant and Thomas Edison and with Pope Leo the 13th. Not to be confused with the current Pope, that's Pope Leo the 14th. But Pope Leo the 13th, who was a 19th century pope, did drink cocaine wine, loved it so much that he appeared in a full-page advertisement for it after giving its creator a medal, and that was seen as a totally normal thing, because back then, that was something that you could buy in a supermarket.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too, because when you get to later on in the book and you start looking at Warhol and Kesey, and then you get another look at Timothy Leary, that's the 60s and 70s are the, I guess, in acknowledging this stuff and saying it was okay is when we figured out that a lot of it isn't okay. That's the great irony, is that the people who really are the proponents of, let's just make all this stuff legal, and it's like, wait a minute, now that we've really looked at this stuff, it ain't really that good for you, is it?
I mean, yeah, there's certainly we see the ways in which they can be dangerous. Like on one hand, there's a lot of cool there's a lot of cool psychedelic artwork, but and there's a lot of cultural stuff. There's the Beatles doing Sgt. Pepper.
By the way, I want to stop you for 1 second. Best chapter title of all time: Sergeant Pothead's Loaded Hard Drug Band, aka the Beatles. Great chapter title. I'm sorry. Go on, please continue.
Thank you. Yeah, but so you've got like the two sides of it. On one hand, you've got like a flowering of creativity and alternative spirituality. On the other hand, you've got the CIA doing an MK Ultra program, spending $240,000 in back then money to buy up the entire world's pharmaceutical supply of LSD and try and figure out how they can weaponize it in hopes of creating mind control or Manchurian agents or stuff like that. So you've got the government performing terrible experiments like the one at Harvard, in which Ted Kaczynski, who was at that point a shy, nebbishy book nerd, he signs up for what he thinks is a psych experiment that turns out to be a front for a CIA interrogation scheme. And after 3 years of being experimented on, having LSD put into his coffee and then screamed at and having his views challenged, he ends up deciding that modern society and modern technology are evil and ends up becoming a terrorist who goes and mails bombs to people as the Unabomber,
I mean, and let's make this really clear from the top with feeling, the CIA, he does, by the way, in this wonderful book, but the CIA, you can make a case, actually created the Unabomber. And we actually get a lot of comments online, too. I thought of the same thing, by the way, Trucker Bosun. Wanted me to tell you, the movie Tombstone portrayed Wyatt Earp's first wife as a laudanum addict. Laudanum, of course, is what we were just talking about just a little bit ago, the idea that everybody... But people brushed their teeth with whiskey in the late 19th century, didn't they? I mean, whiskey became a catch-all for everything in regards to medicinal behavior in America of the 19th century. That's fair, right?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this is a time when things are much less sanitary than they are now, and alcohol, like strong alcohol, is well known to kill germs. So based on, like, it's not the most thorough understanding of the subject matter, but generally people understood, okay, if there's alcohol here, this can kill a lot of germs, this can clean things, this is less likely to be infected with waterborne diseases than a lot of other stuff. So certainly it was very natural for people to incorporate alcohol into medical things. It was just seen as being part of a it was a good solution, and it was seen as like literally a good solution for mixing stuff up, but also seen as being clean, easy to get, effective. So certainly, medicinal whiskey was very much a concept that was believed in back then. And in fact, a lot of places during Prohibition were able to keep selling whiskey by selling it with prescription only.
By the way, medicinal whiskey is still something to this very day that people often find the medicinal value in. It continues. I mean, that's the truth of the matter too. And one of the things that we're still dealing with today is that people are still, in the form of pharmacology, really kind of, in some ways, some of these problems have been solved. We now know that there are drugs that can help neurodivergence that are not speed, but actually have the same effects as speed. And when taken by the people that need them under supervision, it can make a difference. But up until that point, I mean, who knows? I mean, maybe we don't get Sauter if he's taking Adderall or Vyvanse, right?
No, yeah, it's like, and certainly that kind of, again, like the technology for amphetamines was not there until, I would say like the early 20th century. So certainly you see in the world wars, amphetamines become very widely used among troops. But for a lot of history, those things were not options. You look at the drugs that are really, really old, the ones that predate, and you have in terms of things that predate humans learning how to write, you've got like alcohol, you got cannabis, you got opium, but you don't have a lot, So yeah, for a long period of time, people were just self-medicating with alcohol because it was one of the few easy things to get that could actually make you feel profoundly different.
I am not going to tell you everything in this book, guys, by the way, but I will tell you that the most prolific creators of psychedelic drugs might have been on the DEA payroll, and a whole bunch of other groovy stuff that is contained in this book. I can't thank you enough, by the way, for joining us this morning. Sam Kelly is the author of The Human History on Drugs, an utterly scandalous but entirely truthful look at history under the influence. You can find him on the TikTok at Human History on Drugs, or you can find him on, and by the way, the book is available through Penguin Random House Press. I can't thank you enough for making the time for us today, man. Best of luck with the book. We're big fans over here. Hope you enjoyed yourself.
Hey, thank you so much. It was a pleasure being here. I was happy to be on the show.
Thank you, sir. Sam Kelly, by the way. Please check him out on TikTok. He's a historian, and he's the author of The Human History on Drugs.